The name of this sermon is Consider Your Ways. Consider thy ways. Let me start with a couple quotes. These quotes are, you need to think about them for a minute. Christianity is about helping others and controlling yourself. When it becomes about controlling others and helping yourself, it isn't Christianity. Let me repeat that. Christianity is about helping others and controlling yourself. When it becomes about controlling others and helping yourself, it isn't Christianity. Here's another one. A double standard is judging others by their actions and yourself by your motives. Judging others by their actions and yourself by your motives. Well, the world is full of stories about people being judged unfairly. Sometimes it's while they're alive, and sometimes it's after they're died. A perfect example is people tearing statues down because they did or said something at another time, and that's completely unfair because they lived in another time. It was 200 years ago that they lived, or maybe 150 years ago, and everything was different. There's a story about two men. Abraham Lincoln, who everyone knows was the President of the United States, but there was another man called Frederick Douglass, who lived at the same time. Frederick Douglass was born in 1818 as a slave. He escaped, and he went to the north, and he had been taught to read, and so he read ferociously. Everything he could read, he read. And so he educated himself, and he was a very smart man. And he wanted more than anything to have all the slaves freed. And so he worked toward that. And Abraham Lincoln was running for president, and he had a speech. And after the speech, he went to Frederick Douglass and said to him, "How was my speech? I want to know how it was. I want to know what you thought of it, because what you think of it is more important than what anybody else thinks of it, because I value your opinion so highly." Well, you know that Abraham Lincoln was elected as the president, and he did a lot of good things. And Frederick was mad at him because he didn't do enough. He thought as soon as he became president, all would go away. Everything would be fixed, and it wasn't. And these two men were men of their time. They did the best they could, and Abraham Lincoln understood that sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. And like the rest of us, they were both flawed, and they both had their weaknesses, and to judge them by today's standard is wrong. Well, I want to look at this passage I just read in both ways. I want to look at how they failed and how they sinned and how it was ugliness of it. And I want to show you how God came in defense of Moses and how Moses called on God to forgive those who had acted toward him unwisely and in anger. In a way, this passage is the entire Bible. It's sin, it's judgment, and it's grace. The sin was them speaking against Moses. The judgment was God saying, "You cannot do this to my servant, and here's what's happening to you." And grace was, they were forgiven. Jesus did that. After I'm done looking at the passage, I want to go at it at a different angle and give them the benefit of saying, these two people may have done better in that circumstance than I would have done. Maybe if I was them, I would have been done worse. Well, number one is freely add to the grievance. In verse 1 it says, "Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he'd married a Cushite woman. And if it had stopped there, it probably wouldn't have made it into the Bible. If they were mad at this woman, see, I read the commentaries, and it said there's three possibilities. One, his wife had died because they'd been married for 40 years. They would have been in their 80s. Second is that she left and decided not to go with, she went back and they were separated. Or third, he took a second wife. We don't know that. It doesn't, this is the only mention of a Cushite woman who became his wife. Well, as things happened, it didn't stop there. Verse 2 said, and they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? Now, many times the anger we express, what we say, is really only the edge of something else. We say something and it's not really what we want to say, it's just a stand-in. We're mad at somebody for something and we say something else. For Miriam and Aaron, the new wife was not the problem. It may have just been a buy-in to bring up this case of he has all the power and we should have some of it too, or most of it. They were mad at Moses for doing something stupid in their eyes, and they thought that this stupid thing was enough to say, if he's making decisions like that, he should no longer be in charge of the entire nation. They called into question his right to lead. They were also ready to step in and replace him. Now, by their actions, by his actions, so far in this 2-year journey, he had fortified his right to rule. He'd saved the nation many times, as I read in verse 11, where it said, and they came to him and he prayed, and the Lord, the fire, he had proved his right to lead. But now he'd failed. Now he'd done this stupid thing, and they were concerned that he was no longer fit to rule. Now, you notice something. Through this passage, God spoke to Miriam. God spoke to them about complaining about Moses, but he never brought up the answer about the concern about Moses' wife. That was never brought up. God, leaving it out, may have said to them, it's not your concern, and making it your concern, you have moved in from judging Moses to judging me and my decisions. I wonder, and this, bear in mind I'm speculating here, and we only have this one verse. Maybe she was flaunting her new position as the wife of the leader of the nation. Maybe that was her weakness. But it's all speculation. She may have just clashed with the new in-laws. She may have embraced the role of First Lady. We talk about First Lady in the President of the United States and how the First Lady does this and that. Maybe she was doing that, and they just didn't like the way she was doing it. Another question that I have is, who were they grumbling with? It says they spoke against Moses. Who did they spoke those words to? Who did they speak those words to? It's one thing to keep it to yourself, and another to voice it to anyone who will listen. Well, number 2, I will take up the cause. The second part of B says, and the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man that was on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and Miriam, you 3 come up to the tent of meeting. And the 3 of them came up. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the doorway of the tent. And he called Aaron and Miriam. When they had both come forward, he said, hear now my words. If there's a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him in a vision. I will speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He's faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses? Now, the commentaries have the opinion that Moses would have let this all go. He would have not said anything about it. But God wasn't okay with that. The Lord had heard this. Now, saying that it had come to the Lord's attention would be wrong in the fact that God knew that this was happening. He knows the thoughts and intents of our heart. Now, it seems that the thoughts and the intents of Miriam and Aaron's heart were toward mutiny. They were going to take some of the authority God had given Moses and claim it for themselves. In doing so, they took away God's choices. He chose Moses, and they were saying he had made a mistake. Well, God stepped in and changed the narrative. If you've ever been wrongly accused by someone, this is the script you want to happen. The most powerful being in the universe says, no, he didn't do wrong. It was as if he said, hey, you there, get over here, and you're in for a royal dressing down. And Moses was vindicated, and now they knew it. Number 3 is crime and punishment. So the anger of the Lord burned against them, and they departed, and he departed. But when the cloud had withdrawn from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. As Aaron turned toward Miriam, behold, she was leprous. Then Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, I beg you, do not account this sin to us in what we have acted foolishly, and in which we have sinned. Oh, do not let her be like one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb. Now, Miriam felt the anger of the Lord. And the interesting thing is, it says the Lord was angry with them both, with them, and he departed. He was angry with them, but only Miriam was punished. And the answer to that would be, if Aaron was punished, if Aaron became leprous, that would be the end of him as the chief priest, the high priest of the Lord. He could never be the high priest, and so the Lord, in his mercy, didn't make Aaron leprous too, because then he couldn't have done his job. It's kind of sad that Miriam had to take the blunt of it. And this is not the only story of somebody, God's reaching out and punishing somebody. There's a story of a king of Samaria who had, God sent his prophet to him and said, this and this and this is going to happen because of your sin. And the king went like that, you arrest him. And the king's arm was frozen there, dead. The king couldn't withdraw his arm, he couldn't remove his arm, it was done. And he had asked the prophet to pray to God to heal his arm. Lot's wife turned back towards Sodom, and in her heart wanted to return, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Well, the difference between those two is these two had been faithful servants. Aaron and Miriam were both faithful servants. They failed. They failed like the two women that Paul talked about, Eutychia and Sithika. How do you pronounce their names? Anyway, the point is, you know who I'm talking about. They were both good servants of the Lord, and they had a dispute, and now there was a big fight going on. You see, in verse 11, Aaron realized that Moses had not lost any of his authority when they went up against him. His position wasn't weakened at all by their mutiny, and now Aaron was glad of it because he could come to Moses and say, you have the ear of God. ask him to heal our sister. Well, in number 4 is, be the deliverer again. Verse 13 says, Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "O God, heal her, I pray." But the Lord said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterwards she may be received again." So Miriam was shut up outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until Miriam was received again. Well, Moses was called on again, as he was in Numbers 11, called on to turn the other cheek. He'd already done it a number of times for the entire nation, and now he was called on to return good for the evil he had received. Only he could intercede for them, and God said yes, but she's going to have this sin known by everybody. She will be an example for them to see. It's why are we sitting outside? Why are we waiting? It's because Miriam sinned against Moses and called into question my choice as a leader. You can't do that and not go unpunished. Her dirty laundry was on plain view for everyone to see for a week. Now, what's the conclusion of this? Now, if you notice, I spent only a short time. The conclusion is longer than the rest. And I want to use an example from the media that's right now going on. In Kenosha, a year ago, there was a black man who was shot by the police. Not only was it was a fair shooting, but there was riots. For 3 days there was riots. The police sat outside in the squad cars and they watched the riot go on and they didn't intervene. Cars in a car lot, the 100 cars were one after another set on fire and the police watched it. Anyway, a young man called Kyle Rittenhouse came there with the idea of protecting businesses and offering first aid. So that was what he came to do. It all went badly, and it's a high-profile trial, which doesn't make sense because they're trying him for murder, but there is video from multiple angles and eyewitness accounts that said no, he was doing it self-defense. Now, obviously, he wasn't supposed to be there with the gun. He was too young to own the gun. He was too young to bring it. And they make a lot of it crossing the state line, but it's like his father worked there. It's like if you live in Sackville and work in Amherst. You cross the state line. You cross the provincial line. And so the point was that he ended up killing 2 people and wounding a third. Now, as I say, there's lots of footage, including infrared footage from a plane 9,000 feet overhead taking video of it. So they know every step he took. And as I say, he came there to protect the businesses and give aid. Then he was attacked by a criminal, a man who had been convicted of molesting 5 small children, and he'd been in a mental institute for attempting suicide, and they just let him out, and he came to the riot for whatever reason, and he attacked him. Witnesses said that he said to him, "I'm going to take your gun from you and kill you with it." And so they were wrestling over the gun, and Kyle shot him. Then he was being chased by other men, and he was hit by somebody who was carrying a skateboard, another person who turned out to be a criminal with a dangerous offender record, hit him with a skateboard, knocked him down, continued to hit him, and he was shot. And the third person had his gun pointed at his face and advancing toward him when he shot him in the arm. And then he tried to give himself up to the police. All of that is clearly seen in the videos. Now, what if he hadn't been attacked by this man? He probably would have done what he came to do, got back in his car, went back to Sackville, equivalent distance, you know what I'm saying, short distance, and no one would know his name. You'd never have heard of him. Now, when we read this Bible account, there's no in-depth reporting about the days running up to this fateful day when Miriam and Aaron became part of recorded history. We don't know anything about the marriage. We don't know anything about how many things were going on. We simply know, it simply says that Moses chose poorly when he chose a new wife. That's their opinion. And if that's all that we had heard of, verse 1, we wouldn't have had a record at all. It wouldn't have been in the Bible. For all we know, it wasn't the fact that she was a Cushite, and that some people think she was black, and that may not have been the concern either. It may have been her behavior or her attitude. I think that maybe Moses did talk to God about his decision because he talked to God every day, and it probably came up. And maybe he did get God's approval. We don't know any of those things. It would be nice to know, but we don't. We missed all those details, so the only thing we can look at is the ones we have. In the trial of this man, who's Kyle Rittenhouse, we know what he did in the days running up to when the fateful night. We know that he had spent the morning washing graffiti off of the school. We knew who his friends were, what he played his video games. All of those things have come out in the trial. We know what he did that night. It's all videotaped by lots of people. In the case of Miriam and Aaron, we don't know what pressures they were under or what things were going on in their lives. What we do know is that it was close to the time where they sent spies to go into the land. We also don't read about all the other little events that were going on every day. If you remember, there was a rule that if a man thought his wife was being unfaithful, she would come to the temple, she would drink some water, which included the dirt from the temple floor, and if her belly swelled up or whatever. So that would be part of Aaron's duties. He would have to determine whether, did she really, and maybe she did. And the next couple who came, maybe they didn't do anything. Maybe she was innocent. And there was also the rule that if a child was not behaving properly to his parents, he would be stoned. And Aaron would have to see if he could sort this out so that the son would behave properly and not get stoned, and all of those things were part of their daily routine, the pressures they were under. We forget that this was 2 years into what would be a 40-year lockdown with all sorts of mandates about what they could and could not do. And there was also, they add to this, that the people had been slaves for hundreds of years. And now they were free, and they had to recognize that they had to make their own decisions, and they were responsible for those decisions. And they had to be led in such a way that when you have a child, you want them to make their own decisions, and you want the decisions to be maybe wrong, but not too wrong. I remember I found a big pot. It was this big around, cast iron pot, cracking. And I rolled it from half a mile up a hill and over the fields, and we planted flowers in it. And this guy came in and said, "I'd like to buy your cauldron." And he offered me $10 for it. And I asked my mother, should I sell it? And she said, "It's up to you, it's your cauldron." She wanted me to make a mistake and live with the consequences. Well, I sold it for $10, and as soon as he dumped the dirt out and left, I thought, that was a bad idea. But the point was, he had 2 million people that they had to do the same thing to. And you know that before, if somebody else made a decision on your behalf, they were responsible, it wasn't you. I remember a story of Russia. This was when communist Russia was... Anyway, thousands of pairs of shoes were made with the heel fastened to the toe. This part was fastened to the foot of the front of the shoe. They did it because somebody in charge said that's the way to do it, and they just followed along. That's someone else's decision, it's not my decision, it's stupid, but who's... You know that when people are prisoners, they're told when to get up, they're told when to wash, they're told when to eat, they're told when to exercise, all those things, and then they get out. And they have trouble after 5 years of being somebody making all the decisions for them, they have to make their own. And some people struggle with that. Well, if Kyle, the problem is that when you make a decision, you hope that the decision is small enough to not affect your life for the rest of it. It's not too wrong. If Kyle had stayed home, he would be fine. We'd never have known his name, but then he would be like everyone else, watching it on TV and not trying to fix it. And for better or worse, he wanted to do something to fix it. He wanted to help. If he left his rifle home, well, the whole point was to protect businesses from being looted, and he needed something that would cause people to... So it's all, again, it's a judgment call. If in that first episode where the person is coming running toward him and has his hands on this gun, and if he had fought a little harder and subdued the man, then there would not be any shots fired and someone dead. But there was. And once he pulled the trigger, the end result was the riot caught up to him. Because there were no cooler heads. They were all crazy, high on violence. I watched the video of him being chased by these people, and he falls down on the ground. He trips. And he falls down, and now he's turned around, and he's sitting on his bottom, and he's got the rifle pointed at people. And they keep running. Normally, if you know that somebody has already shot someone, and he's got a loaded gun, and you don't run toward him, you run away. But they didn't scatter. They kept running toward him. And so the next guy ends up hitting him with a skateboard. Another felon. And he shoots him. Now, they must have thought, like, nothing can happen to me. I've been looting for 3 days. I've been burning stuff for 3 days, and no one's ever interfered. This will be the same. But it wasn't. Well, Miriam and Aaron started out merely being opposed to Moses, their younger brother, marrying this woman. She wasn't good enough for him, or she wasn't chaste enough, or she wasn't part of the tribe of Levi. He should be setting a better example for the rest of the people. and more and better reasons. If they'd only stopped there and confined it to the new wife, but once they started the rant, it just continued. And they stepped off the cliff and gravity hit them. They accused God of choosing the wrong leader. He wasn't special or reliable or trustworthy if he made decisions like picking this new wife. Well, this was a revolt against God and his choice of a leader. He was their brother first and God's chosen leader second. They should have gone to God. They should have said to Moses, look, we don't like your new wife, and we want you, as God's representative, to go to God for us and ask the question, is this a mistake? Should you not be married to her? Should you annul the marriage? And if God says no, then we're done. You'll never hear a word of it again from us. We'll treat her as best we can because we love you and we'll love her. They didn't. For whatever reason, and Miriam was punished. And Moses proved once again that he was only interested in what is best for them, and he prayed for her healing, and it was a full healing, but she came out the other end with her reputation much diminished. 2 Timothy 3:16 says this, all Scripture is inspired by God and beneficial for teaching, for rebuke, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man and woman of God may be fully capable, equipped for every good work. So that means that this sad story is there for us to not follow in their footsteps, to learn from it and not follow in their footsteps. They could have started with the best intentions. They may have been under more stress than we could have endured. They could have been the last straw that broke the camel's back. I remember hearing a man who was at a guy I work with who was at a party, and the place was full, and there was a really big guy, a strapping man, 280, whatever, 6'3", 280, and there was a short man who just kept picking at him and picking at him and kicking him and pushing him, and eventually the man gave up on his attempt to be peaceful. And the guy said, I ran out the door because the guy had him on the ground and was just smashing him. And he wasn't stopping. And he said, he's going to kill him and I don't want to be here when it happens. The straw that broke the camel's back would be the last kick this guy gave somebody who should have left alone. Now, maybe if we were there, we would have failed spectacularly ourselves if we'd been in their situation. They were partway into what would end up being a 40-year lockdown, and they were responsible for enforcing all the mandates that had to be in place because God lived in the center of the camp, in their midst. Well, we're almost at 2 years into the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And there's nobody saying, I guarantee you that I left a blank in my page here, how many weeks or how many months before it'll be done. We have no one saying that. We as Christians need to be willing to understand that when someone cracks under that kind of pressure and stress of the moment and says something that you disagree with, or something unkind, there may be some truth in what they say, and who knows, it may be us being unreasonable that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It also could be that you were totally right, and you didn't deserve anything they said or did to you. They're just frustrated with everything, and once they've started, they were like Miriam and crossed the line into sin. I would hope that we can forgive them like Moses and heal the relationship. There are pastors who are calling other pastors names. You didn't do it the way I did it, therefore you were wrong. I remember a videotape of an interview with John MacArthur. John MacArthur has Grace Church in California, and he did his services online, but he didn't lock the church. And first week there was 100, and then there was 400, and then there was 800, and then there was thousands, and he didn't lock the church. Anybody who wanted to come could come. And he said, if they put me in jail, well, I'm okay with that. I'll start a prison ministry. Well, they never did put him in jail, but there are other pastors who followed the mandates to the letter. And we may never know who was right and who was wrong until we get to heaven, and maybe they were both right. I'm asking that we follow the advice of James 1:19 that says, you know this, my brothers and beloved brothers and sisters. Now everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. It's good advice meant for a time like this when most are doing the opposite. I want to be like Moses and forgive, knowing that when people are under more stress, that's the time where forgiveness is needed the most. You see, we can't do this perfectly. And this is in our lifetime, nothing like this has happened. So what I'm asking is, say Moses. When you're about ready to explode, say Moses. And say, he was able, in spite of the fact that he was under this tremendous pressure, he forgave. He moved on, and he was our example. As I said, this whole chapter is the story of the Bible. Sin, judgment, and forgiveness, and mercy. And if we can do that, we'll be the Christians that people want to look at and follow our example.